They are the most overrated team in the last 10 years. One real quick, Urban Meyer, I'd love to take a class with him dealing on ethics.
The Big Bets on Campus podcast.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and this is a special Week 1 episode for college football leading up to the full slate Week 0 now in the books. I'm joined by Action Network's own college football insider, Brett McMurphy, for a news and notes edition of the pod. So as I mentioned, we're going to run through Week 0. We're going to tie up some loose ends. We're going to get you ready for the first full slate of college football, starting on Thursday, running all the way through Labor Day. And we'll start with Week 0. Georgia Tech scoring their first top 10 upset in 9 years. It was a clean game in Dublin, 0 turnovers between the two teams. Florida State failing to register 300 yards of total offense. But I thought this was the stat of the game. Florida State punted it away with 6:19 remaining in the third quarter. They would have the ball just once for the remainder of the game. Georgia Tech played keep away. They won an 11-play touchdown drive. And then with an opportunity to drain the clock, kick a game-winning field goal. They go for 12 plays. They set up Aiden Burr for the game winner from 44 yards out. 12 minutes and 55 seconds. That's how much the Yellow Jackets burned on their final two drives playing keep away. And now this really ties into something that I think you and me are on the same page here. The ACC we thought would be wide open. A top 10 team going down immediately only helps. Do you feel even better about your Hokies tickets, Brett?
Yeah, I do, Mike, but I'm surprised because I talked to Mike Norvell over the summer and he told me that he thought this was the best offensive line that Florida State had. He thought defensively, even though they lost a lot of guys to the NFL, they had a lot of guys that had not necessarily had a lot of starts, but had played a lot of plays last year and didn't see a big drop off. But you're right. Georgia Tech played keep away. You know, Brent Key said after the game, run the damn ball. That's exactly what they did. 8 possessions for each team, the fewest since 2020. I saw somebody reference that. So yeah, it was a perfect game plan by Georgia Tech. And yeah, for my preseason bowl projections, I had playoff projections. I had Miami winning the ACC. I had Virginia Tech getting a large bid from the ACC, and I didn't have Florida State getting into the playoffs. So they didn't show me. Look, they can still get there. But certainly they've got to be a different team. And something else, Mike, I'm sure you saw this too, is Florida State either can't throw the ball downfield or they don't have the confidence for DJU to throw the ball down the field. And that's not a winning daily double in my mind anyway.
Yeah, the air yard numbers were just shocking. That graphic was thrown around on social media that he had negative air yards at one point, I think 12 attempts into the game. So it'll be interesting to see if they take the governor off this offense, they force the ball downfield, or if this is a known limitation that they already have and they just need to get creative in terms of stretching the field horizontally to try to get people in open space. But certainly alarm bells going off for all those fans in Tallahassee. Now, you mentioned that there were so few drives on that game, one of the lowest totals in the past 5 years. I saw something this weekend as well in Week 0 that I'd never seen in a college football game, and it was an ejection mid-play for spitting. So Brandon Crossley from SMU was tossed, but apparently it was retaliatory, according at least to his head coach, that people had been spit on during the game. Jordan Hudson, a wide receiver, he said that he was on the receiving end of it. That wasn't a penalty. But certainly it kept Nevada alive. They had multiple drives extended through penalties, and they throw a big scare into SMU. Were you surprised that SMU, the first game in the ACC as a huge favorite, did not come out and play all that well? They looked for long stretches of that game like a really poorly coached team. And he addressed it post-game. He said, we played emotionally and not passionately, and there's a fine line between the two. But were you surprised to see the Ponies nearly get upset in Week 0?
Yeah, I mean, they were a 4-touchdown favorite. And for any Seinfeld fans out there, that was one magic loogie. There's one thing, and I know Colin's high on SMU. I think you are too, season-wise. There's one thing, again, just blindly including SMU over all these teams moving into new conferences. have a database. 16 schools have made the jump in the last 13 years. Only 3 of those 16 have had a winning conference record in their first year in their new league. This was not a conference game, but for people just to automatically think SMU is going to jump up into a power league and compete at the highest levels, I think you're mistaken. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. Certainly struggling against Nevada is not a good debut, but again, at the end of the year, nobody's going to care if you won by 5 points or 50 points. They won and survived. You know, the old cliche, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any quarterbacks. I know your boy Preston Stone was in there most of the game, but he, did split some time. Is that going to, raise its head as we get into ACC play? But, look, they survived and advanced. I think Nevada made some strategic calls that cost them in the game. They went for it around midfield that I thought they'd punt it deep the way their defense was playing. But ultimately SMU found a way to pull it out, and Stone made a huge pass to the tight end, backed up to his own goal line. That really turned the game around. But yeah, for people who just blindly think SMU is going to come in here and run roughshod over the ACC, I think they're mistaken. They don't have the depth that these other power schools have. Obviously, Nevada is not a power school.
The one positive note I will toss in for SMU, RJ Merrill on their tight end looked incredible. Yeah. He caught the game-winning touchdown. He seems like he's destined for NFL riches, at least to be a mid-round draft pick, because he was a matchup issue on the perimeter. We'll see how much they go to him in crunch time throughout the season. Closing out week 0, Nevada, Montana State. That game was electric, and I think it was, a nice little surprise for college football fans. That line kept creeping up. I think it opened at 9.5. It closed at 14. There was a sense that Montana State, who will be competing for the FCS national championship this year, at least as a top 5 team coming out of the preseason, that they were just going to roll over the Lobos. They did not. The Lobos scored 2 defensive touchdowns. But at the end of the game, Montana State scores the final 21 points, including, I believe it was a 93-yard rushing touchdown. They score with 10 seconds remaining to win the game, and New Mexico left points on the board, missing 2 field goals and losing by 4, but critically covering the number there. And then finally, out on the island, tons of wind coming off Hurricane Hone grounded the Hawaii passing attack. There was just no real opportunity to get into a flow. Shager only completed 50% of his passes, but they got out the win. They had no chance really to cover that number. I believe it closed at 41. They end up winning by 21 points in that game. Shager scores 2 on the ground, 2 through the air. So at least some momentum headed into that week 1 matchup against UCLA. That's a game that Colin has talked a lot about. Do you think the Rainbow Warriors have a chance to throw a scare into UCLA in their first game as a Big Ten member?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I talked to Timmy Chang at Mountain West Media Days, and I asked him, are you going to, maybe not show your entire playbook against Delaware State? And he smiled and he said no comment. So obviously, they didn't show everything, and that's a impossible game for Hawaii. What motivation do you have? You're 6 touchdown favorites. You're playing you got a Power 4 school coming to your place the following week. So like you mentioned, the weather conditions, you add all that up, Hawaii did not have their A game. Certainly, I think they can compete with UCLA. I have questions about UCLA. That basically the entire coaching staff is no longer there. Deshaun Foster, did not make the greatest first impression at Big Ten Media Days. Does that mean he's a bad coach? No. Does that mean he's a great coach? No. We're going to find out in their first road game. No, what I think what's most alarming, or not alarming, most concerning for me, if I'm a UCLA backer, is I believe there's nobody on the UCLA staff that has ever been a head coach. And how will that translate in game 1? How will that translate through the season? We'll have to find out. But no, I think Hawaii's fine. I certainly think they have a chance to win this game. I believe it opened up at 17 in the over the summer. I think it's dipped now down to 12 or 13. That makes sense. I wouldn't take less than that if you like Hawaii, but I think we're going to get an entertaining game and a much different Hawaii team than those sickos that stayed up at midnight Eastern watched last week.
Now you're still fitting in some preseason articles, and one that you're working on is that there are 12 teams this year with these new super conferences coast to coast. There's 12 separate programs that have at least 3 consecutive games versus ranked opponents. We know that Florida is one of these teams being fed into the wood chipper. That's probably going to cost Billy Napier his job. But of these teams that you were looking through, what would you say the one that you're the highest on, but you just keep coming back to that schedule? It's like, how do you go through a gauntlet where you play ranked teams for almost a month straight? Any of these teams still positive for you, or do you think it's just going to swallow up most of these programs? Just the body blow theory of having to play top 10, top 15, top 25 teams week after week after week.
Yeah, I really do. And of the 12 teams, only 2 of the teams are current that have to face these consecutive ranked teams are currently ranked, and that's Alabama and Oklahoma. I think they'll do fine. I really like Michigan State with Jonathan Smith. I think he'll do a tremendous job there. It may take some time, but he's got back-to-back games in consecutive weeks, no off weeks, against Ohio State and against Oregon. South Carolina, Shane Beamer, his future somewhat questionable. Well, it doesn't help that he's got 4 consecutive games against ranked opponents: Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, and A&M. Only 1 off week in that span. And then if you want to really feel bad for somebody other than Florida, Mississippi State, they have 3 consecutive games against Texas, Georgia, and Texas A&M. And then they have two games against non-ranked teams. And then they close with Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss. That's 6 ranked opponents in 8 weeks. Jeff Levy, welcome to the SEC.
Another list that you're putting together that I find to be really interesting is most overrated and underrated teams of the past 10 seasons, the college football playoff era, at least the 4-team era, based upon preseason AP ranking and where they finish at the end of the year. And I think this is a good list to go off of, because also you can consider this in terms of public teams and non-public teams. And for the most part, when you're on those non-public teams, you're getting the best of the number, where on a weekly basis with public teams, you're paying a premium to go with these name brands out of the SEC, a name brand like USC, LSU. You just have to pay a little bit extra for the helmet. So just walk us through the top 5. We'll start with underrated teams that you were able to unearth from this college football playoff era.
Yeah, so real quickly, like you said, this is based on the preseason rankings in the AP poll since 2014, the first year of the college football playoff, and where they finished in the final AP poll. So obviously the most underrated teams are going to be teams that were not ranked in the preseason, kind of no-name teams. So you look at the top 5, shouldn't surprise you. Northwestern, the most underrated team the last 10 years. Cincinnati comes in at 2nd. TCU 3rd. Surprising 2 SEC teams are next, Missouri and Kentucky. But again, the reason those guys are up there is because historically they haven't been ranked in the preseason. They finish in the final AP poll, so then they get positive points, if you will, in coming up with the most underrated team. So I guess that's no surprise. It's hard to be ranked a lot in the preseason and be on the underrated list of the I'm not going to run through it, the top 25. We'll have it on actionnetwork.com today. Oklahoma State actually is tied for 7th. And they've been ranked in the preseason probably more than anybody in the underrated top 25. So they've been able to not only been ranked in the preseason, but exceed those expectations but for the most part, this is a laundry list of teams that are not ranked in the preseason, but finish in the top 25.
And as for the overrated teams, I would agree with you that a lot of this list, it's kind of common sense, but just share the number 1 team, because I would have figured it would have been a higher profile team in the SEC, but this team apparently can never live up to expectations.
Yeah. It's the Auburn Tigers. Most overrated team in the last 10 years. And it's not even close. They've been ranked 8 times in the last 10 years, and they have failed to live up to those rankings in 6 of those years. And by drastic measures, by not even finishing in the top 25. After that, probably not surprising, USC is next. Wisconsin's 3rd, maybe a little bit of a surprise. Texas A&M, we saw what happened with Jimbo Fisher, the only coach in the history of college football to have 3 teams ranked in the preseason top 10 and finish the year unranked. 2 of those happened at A&M, once at Florida. And then fifth is LSU, which may be kind of somewhat surprising. But again, these teams are highly thought of in the preseason and maybe don't live up to those expectations at the end of the year. One other little note on this about teams that are in the top 25 of the most overrated teams. USC has been ranked 7 of the last 9 years. They finished ranked lower in the final poll in 7 of those 9 years than they were in the preseason. And Clemson, the only team, congrats, Dabo, the only team that is finished lower in the final AP poll ranking in each of the last 5 years compared to where they were in the preseason. Will they continue that streak in 2024?
All right, let's go through a few headlines just in the past week leading into the season. I think this is kind of the end of the silly season, talking season, but we had at least one big moment. The Alabama kicker, Graham Nicholson, who comes over from Miami of Ohio. He wins the Groza Award last year. According to their head coach, he was stolen. His quote unquote, we didn't lose him. He's at Alabama. We know exactly where he's at. You media people, it's all pretend. Like, no, Alabama stole our kicker. They illegally recruited our kicker and stole him from us. So real big talk from Coach Martin. Kalen DeBoer basically has denied it flatly the whole time. He goes, he entered the portal. We reached out to him. That's it. That's how it goes. So I guess a part of me is a little bit shocked because in the NIL era and the transfer portal era, you're just used to these, contacts between coaches and players. And I understand there's still rules and there's still guardrails, but for him to come out this strongly, particularly talking about his kicker, at least made me chuckle because it seemed to me he was either going NFL, you win the Groza, you might as well give it a shot at the pro level, or go ahead and get a bag to kick for a potential national champion. So it seemed as though Coach Martin was the only person who didn't know he was headed out. What were your thoughts on this stealing accusation? I know that it is, there's not a lot of value right now in he said arguments, and the NCAA seems pretty toothless. But do you think there'll be any more of this, even just a customary investigation, or do you think that's going to be swept under the rug?
Yeah, I don't see it. And technically, Mike, stolen means you didn't pay for it. He was paid for. So technically he wasn't stolen. Look, Jeff Traylor, UTSA, meet, and Jay Norvell of Colorado State, they have both been outspoken about power conference schools coming after their guys, offering money. But that's the way it works. I thought what was fascinating during the NFL draft coverage, Nick Saban was talking about the corner from Toledo, Mitchell, and basically said he kind of, I don't think he meant to say this, but paraphrasing, he said basically, we tried to get him, but we could. So we tried to get him. So yeah, this goes on everywhere. But I love Chuck Martin. He's incredible. He doesn't give you coach speak. He tells you what he thinks, and I appreciate that. I love that. But sorry, Chuck, if you pay for it, technically you're not stolen. But I can see his outrage, and yeah, Mike, it's going to continue, and there's really nothing that can be done to stop this.
Speaking of breaking rules when it comes to the transfer portal, Kirk Ferentz and his assistant coach, John Budmeyer, are taking a self-imposed 1-game suspension for illegally contacting, of all people, Cade McNamara out of the portal, who is apparently going to be their starting quarterback this year. Ferentz is the longest tenured FBS head coach, and if this sticks, this will be his first level 2 violation since taking over the program in 1999. Is it shocking to you that Ferentz flubbed this one? Do you think it, first of all, it seems to me that a guy who hasn't broken rules in 25 years probably is a stickler for it, and this could just, be an actual mistake situation where they contacted him 36 hours early. He leaned on an assistant coach. I'll ask a pointed question. Do you think this self-imposed suspension will be enough and this will just blow right over and then NCAA will move on to bigger things?
Yeah, I do. And look, Kirk Ferentz is incredible integrity. And every coach, every current and past coach has violated NCAA rules. I mean, the rule book is thicker than War and Peace. So it's impossible not to violate a rule. On the scale of rule breaking between 1 and 100, this is a negative 47. So they self-imposed the penalty. He got up in front of everyone. He discussed it. He didn't shy away. He didn't no comment. He didn't do any of that. He did it with integrity. You can make jokes about his offense last year, I actually joked with them last at Big Ten Media Day. I said, man, I think you guys are going to be a lot stronger on offense. McNamara is not injured. You've got a new coordinator coming in. And I kind of joked and said, yeah, last year it looked like you kind of had one arm tied behind your back. And he laughed at me and he goes, yeah, sometimes two arms behind our back. So this will pass over, and they can start concentrating on the Iowa State game coming up in a couple weeks.
Speaking of nothing burgers, if you've been reading the news, Florida State and the ACC completed a court-ordered mediation, which basically means nothing. It was the Leon County judge, John Cooper, who initiated this in the hopes of a quick resolution to the case. We all know that this is not going to have a quick resolution. ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips has said over and over again, 4 months, that the ACC is going to fight tooth and nail against Clemson and Florida State, attempting to leave the conference early without paying those massive exit fees. For perspective, it's alleged that Clemson's exit fee just on their own would be over $140 million. Do you see any movement in this, or is this going to be a real slow slog through the courts?
Yeah, no, the ACC's taken the playbook out of one of their former coaching legends, Dean Smith, and that is four corners offense. They're going to stall, because the last thing the ACC wants is for Florida State to get to the end where they know what the number is to get out, what they need to do to get out, because once that happens, then you've got a lot of uncertainty going. If the longer you can delay that, the longer Florida State remains in the conference. Maybe you have a way to rally, keep the troops together, whatever. But yeah, Mike, this is not going away anytime quick. If the ACC has something to say about this, and they certainly do, so this is going to be an ongoing issue, and unfortunately, that's going to impact, I think, negatively Florida State, the perception of Florida State. You saw it on social media when Florida State, struggled, and somebody, I don't want to say his name, but his initials were Brett McMurphy, put out a tweet that said, weird stat, it's the first time that a team suing its own conference has never won in Ireland. So you're going to see a lot of those dumb tweets like that. But yeah, it's going to continue, unfortunately, for a long time.
Let's finish with a bit of a feel-good story. Pete Carroll returning to USC, not to coach, but to teach a class. According to university officials, he has agreed in principle, but the class itself, the topic, has not been selected. I'll phrase it to you this way. If there was a current FBS head coach offering a class, whose class would you want to sit in, and which topics would you like them to cover? Me personally, I want to go brand marketing with Coach Prime. I want to know how to brand myself, how to increase my exposure, because it seems like he's just a natural fit for a role like that. And it could be interesting. I know for a fact there wouldn't be any media crashing that course. So just be me, Coach Prime, and the kids circling up, trying to build our own personal brands. Is there a coach and a topic that you would like to be a part of as a college student?
Well, I don't know if you're probably aware of this, but the late great Mike Leach, actually, he did teach courses while he was coaching. Look, there's a million former coaches I could come up with. One real quick, Urban Meyer. I'd love to take a class with him dealing on ethics. For the current coaches, I guess there's three here. Deion Sanders, dealing with the media. I'd love to attend that class. Dabo Sweeney, how to traverse the transfer portal, the ins and outs of really succeeding at that. And finally, one guy close to my heart, Mike Gundy of Oklahoma State. I'd love to see him teach a course on how to dance after a game, doing the Gundy. So also his press conference moments, maybe he'll go into that a little bit. But those would be three real quick off the top of my head.
That'll do it for us here in this special edition of the BBOC podcast. And a reminder, if you want early access to BBOC episodes, including exclusive access to our live shows, you must subscribe to the new BBOC YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search BBOC, or check out the link in this episode description. BBOC is back with 2 more episodes this week. I'll be on with Mike Iannello for our Group of 5 deep dive on Wednesday, highlighting all of our top bets across the Group of 5 conferences. And then on Thursday morning, our flagship college football Week 1 betting preview with Stuckey and Colin will arrive before moving to Fridays the best of the rest, all of the segments that you know and love from those guys leading into Saturday, where we'll be joined again. Brett McMurphy, myself, Colin, Stuckey, helping you go through every single angle, every last piece of intel, quarterback battles, injuries, weather, giving you all the information to have a really profitable Saturday. For Brett McMurphy, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the BBOC podcast. Thank you so much for listening.